At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Captain Orion Hale knew the UEF Hephaestus held together solely because the bulkhead screamed in protest. The sound lacked the high-pitched, dashing whine of a sleek aerodynamic fighter jet tearing through the atmosphere. It missed the confident, rhythmic hum of a luxury cruiser's gravity drive. Instead, the ship offered the deep, groaning metallic protest of 3 inches of reinforced titanium carbide alloy, absorbing a kinetic impact capable of flattening a city block. The noise resembled a god grinding his teeth.
"Talk to me, Sparks!"
Hale roared, his voice cutting over the shriek of twisting metal and the blare of alarms.
"Tell me we swim! Give me a damage report excluding the words catastrophic or terminal!"
Lieutenant Commander Val Sparks Newton fought against the 5-point harness at the tactical station as the ship listed violently to port. Her hands danced over a console, sparking like a cheap firework display at a county fair. Smoke curled up from her keyboard, biting and sharp, mixing with the scent of overworked scrubbers and fear.
"Hull breach in Sector 4, frames 9 through 20.
Newton shouted, her eyes locked on the red waterfalls of data pouring down her screen.
Auto sealant is deploying, but the foam struggles to cure in the vacuum. We lose atmosphere, Captain. The Cathari bastard hit us with a plasma lens right on the engineering weld. It cooks the mounting brackets."
Hale wiped a smear of heavy grease and fresh blood from his forehead with his sleeve. He held it compressed to the head of Ensign Stevens, the comms officer who had taken a nasty tumble when the inertial dampeners decided to take a half-second union break during the impact. Stevens groans, eyes unfocused, a trickle of red running into his ear.
"Is he reloading?"
Hale asked, scanning the main view screen. "Stevens, stay with me, kid. Keep the console clean. I just calibrated it yesterday." The main screen displayed a mess of static interference lines and flashing red warning icons demanding attention Hale couldn't give. Yet through the digital haze, the Cathari Envoy shuttle remained visible. It appeared as a teardrop of liquid silver light, elegant, defying physics, and deadly. It looped around for another pass with the grace of a swallow diving for a gnat. It resembled a piece of jewelry designed by a psychopath.
"Energy spike detected."
Newton yelled.
"He's charging the main batteries again. Captain, the Hephaestus is a combat engineering frigate. We build bridges, we fix jump gates. Talk-fighting intersystem diplomats and ships costing more than the GDP of Earth falls outside our job description."
"We function as a brick, Sparks," Hale said, his tone dropping into the low, dangerous register the crew recognized as the shift from captain to mechanic. He pulled Stevens back into his seat and tightened the straps with a violent yank. "We are an ugly, heavy, indestructible brick, and bricks fail to dodge. They break whatever hits them. Reroute power from the fabrication latticework to the forward kinetic drivers." Newton whipped her head around, her ponytail lashing against her cheek.
"The drivers? You cite a debris clearing tool. That system clears asteroids. The targeting computer lacks calibration for a moving vector, and the recoil dampeners lack the rating for a combat speed discharge."
"Today it functions as a diplomat remover," Hale growled, slamming his hand onto the armrest of his command chair. "Do it. Override the safeties. Burn out the coils if necessary. Time the shot for when he crosses the magnetic distinct. He looks too pretty to shield his exhaust ports. He assumes we are merely a construction crew."
"We are a construction crew!"
Newton argued, though her hands obeyed the order. She punched in the override codes, face grim.
"Diverting power. Fabrication is offline. Life support is at minimal. All juice to the magnetic rails. Drivers go hot in 3, 2...
The ship shuddered violently as another plasma bolt glanced off the starboard plating. The deafening sound, a hammer blow, rattled Hale's teeth in his skull. The bridge lights died, instantly replaced by the crimson wash of emergency lighting. The bridge became a submarine, claustrophobic, sweating, and bathed in the color of blood.
"Target enters the firing solution."
Newton screamed.
"He comes right down the throat! He assumes we are dead in the water!"
"Helm! Prepare for the counterburn!" Hale barked at the empty pilot's seat, grabbing the manual attitude controls himself. "If we fail to negate the recoil, the crew turns to jelly against the back wall. Fire maneuvering thrusters on my mark."
"Drivers charged."
"Fire," Hale said. He spoke with the flat, bored effect of a man punching a time card at the end of a long shift. The UEF Hephaestus refrained from firing a laser or launching a missile. Instead, it utilized a pair of industrial-grade mass drivers designed to shatter iron-nickel asteroids for mining operations. 2 tungsten slugs, each the size of a compact car and roughly the same weight, screamed out of the magnetic rails at Mach 500.
Counterburn!
Hell yelled, slamming the thruster controls forward. The ship groaned as the massive kinetic energy release fought against the maneuvering thrusters. The inertial dampeners shrieked, a high-pitched wail sounding like a dying animal. Even with the counterburn, Hell felt the invisible hand of Newton shove him deep inside his chair, squeezing the air outside of his lungs. The Cathari ship boasted a marvel of energy shielding designed to deflect lasers, disperse plasma, and scatter particle beams. It stood as a masterpiece of high-tech defense. However, the designers failed to account for a tungsten Volkswagen moving at hypervelocity speeds. It stood no chance against a simple, brutal momentum. The first slug collapsed the Envoy's forward shield generator. The blinding flash of violet light erupted, a discharge of energy so intense it bleached the sensors white for a microsecond. The shield shattered like glass. The second slug punched through the elegant silver hull like a nail gun through balsa wood. No cinematic fireball occurred. In the vacuum, the event manifested as a sudden, violent, silent expansion of gas, debris, and expensive components. The kinetic transfer proved so absolute that the Cathari ship unmade itself. It turned into a cloud of glittering confetti and superheated gas. "Target destroyed," Newton said, breathless, her hands hovering over the firing controls as if afraid the gun might go off again on its own. "We got him. Scratch 1 diplomat." Hell exhaled, the adrenaline leaving him in a shaky rush. He slumped back into his chair, the silver hull tape on his armrest crinkling under his grip. He looked down at his flight suit. Hydraulic fluid, sweat, old coffee stains, and Stephen's blood covered the fabric. "Good work," Hell said, rubbing his eyes. "Secure the hull patches before we suffocate. I intend to inform the Admiral we accidentally started an interstellar war. He'll be thrilled. Likely a medal follows, or a court-martial. Ideally both." "Comms are fuzzy, Captain," Newton said a moment later, tapping her headset repeatedly as if percussive maintenance would fix the subspace transceiver. "I receive heavy background radiation. The stars seem louder." Hell moved to his command chair, a seat reupholstered with adhesive binding 3 times in the last tour, smelling faintly of engine oil. He sat heavily, feeling the bruises forming on his back. "Try emergency frequencies. Earth Command needs to know that the peaceful envoy tried to turn us into scrap metal. Tag the black box data from the debris field and upload immediately. We need proof." "Trying the..." Newton froze. Her hands stopped. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the red emergency lights. She looked up at the main screen, face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. "Captain, look. Outside." Hell looked. Space had filled up. The stars remained, but massive geometric shapes warped into existence around the Hephaestus, obscuring them. They arrived with zero warning, lacking a hyperspace window or klaxon. They simply appeared. These structures functioned as obsidian monoliths, light-drinking slabs that seemed to cut holes in the fabric of the universe. They lacked the engines and weapon ports of ships. Instead, they hung as giant, silent tombstones in the dark, surrounding the battered human frigate in a perfect, suffocating dodecahedron array. They blotted out the sun. They blotted out the future. "Define those," Stevens mumbled, wiping blood from his eye and squinting at the screen. "Reinforcements? Did the Admiral send the heavy fleet?" "No," Hell said softly, a chill running down his spine, unrelated to the dropping temperature. "That ignores human design. It ignores Cathari tech, too. Cathari ships curve. They flow. These possess knife-edge corners. This represents something else." Suddenly, the ship died. The failure defied standard categories. The reactor physics simply ceased. The hum of the ventilation, the vibration of the deck plates, the low thrum of the standby drives, all vanished instantly. Something ripped the soul from the ship. Gravity cut out. Hell floated up against his restraints, arms drifting weightlessly. Dust motes and droplets of blood from the earlier impact hung suspended in the air like a macabre snow globe. The room, went dead quiet. Then, the voice arrived. Instead of using the speakers, the sound bypassed the auditory nerves entirely and resonated directly within the gelatinous matter of their brains. It brought the sensation of grinding stone and freezing iron, devoid of breath, empathy, or life. It felt like tectonic plates shifting inside their skulls. "Cease attacking or witness our true wrath." Hale winced, clenching his temples, teeth grinding together against the intrusion. The threat landed with the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face. "Report." Hale choked out, fighting the nausea the psychic's shout had induced. "Someone confirm we still possess a ship." "System's dead," Newton whispered, floating sideways near a console, legs drifting toward the ceiling. "Total lockdown. I lack access to manual overrides. The computer acts afraid to turn on. The electrons sit still, Captain." Hale looked at the Onyx platforms. A singular red eye opened on the face of the one directly in front of them. It existed without glowing, a point of absolute redness in the dark. "True wrath," Hale muttered, the taste of copper in his mouth. "Well, that sounds promising. I preferred stern warning." "I failed to raise Earth," Newton said, voice tight with controlled panic. She drifted near the comms panel, pulling herself down by a handhold to keep from bouncing off the ceiling. "The jamming is absolute. This exceeds electronic warfare. The sensors indicate a spatial isolate. We exist in a bubble, Captain, a pocket dimension or a stasis field." Hale unbuckled and pushed off his chair, drifting toward the tactical display with the ease of a spacer. He grabbed a floating stylus and tapped the dead glass. "We have one open line. A method of communication must exist." "One," Newton confirmed, checking a handheld diagnostic tool barely functioning. "Direct link to the platforms, high-band tight beam. I analyzed the handshake code. It looks ancient, Captain. The coding architecture predates human civilization. It predates the Cathari Empire." "The Arbiter procedure," Hale realized, briefing files from the Academy flashing through his mind. "I read the intelligence reports. The Cathari automated peacekeeping systems. Supposedly a myth. A ghost in the machine. A failsafe left over from the precursors." "Well, the ghost just put us in a cage," Newton said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "I read faint signals from outside the bubble. Earth Command screams at us. The Admiral tries to break through, but the Arbiter bounces everything back. It designated us as a quarantine zone. It views Earth Command as a third-party interferer." "Why?" Hale asked, staring at the red eye on the screen. "We suffered an attack. We defended ourselves. The Cathari fired first. We possess the scorch marks to prove it." Newton pulled up a diagnostic on her datapad. "That presents the problem, Captain. I examined the IFF tags from the debris field. The ship that hit us broadcasted a diplomatic transponder code." Hale cursed, a long string of profanities involving several deities in a range. "A diplomat with a plasma lance? That implies an assassin in a tuxedo." "The Arbiter is a logic engine," Newton explained, eyes widening as the terrible realization hit. "It has hard-coded rules. Rule 1, diplomats are non-combatants. Rule 2, non-combatants cannot initiate hostilities. Therefore, logically, when the envoy fired, the Arbiter failed to categorize it as an attack. It categorized the massive energy spike as a reactor malfunction on the envoy ship." "And then it saw us." Hale finished the thought, stomach sinking. "A military-designated combat engineering vessel. We fired kinetic slugs. That exceeds a malfunction. That constitutes an international act of war." "Exactly," Newton said. "To the machine, we just murdered a diplomat suffering engine trouble, and because of the spatial mandate, the Arbiter locked the coordinates. It forbids entry or exit. It forbids the Admiral from explaining. It forbids the politicians from negotiating. It isolated the infection." Hale looked around his bridge. The battered crew, blue-collar soldiers, engineers, and mechanics, fixed jump drives and welded hull plates. They refrained from arguing interstellar law with god machines. "It falls to us," Hale said. "The machine decided I'm the one it wants to talk to." "You are the primary respondent," Newton nodded. "But God help us." The main view screen flickered to life, powered by an external source bypassing the Hephaestus' dead reactor. The crisp, ultra-high-definition image contrasted sharply with the grim, red-lit, smoke-filled interior of the human ship. A Cathari appeared, tall, slender, and unnervingly clean. His skin was a pale, shifting violet, and his robes appeared woven from moonlight and condensation. An educator. "Commanding officer of the aggressor vessel," the hologram spoke. The melodic synthesized voice dripped with disdain. "I am Subprocessor 89. You are hereby summoned to the tribunal of the Pax Cathari. You have been designated primary respondent in the matter of the murder of Envoy Unit 6. Hell floated into the screen, Boots finding purchase on the magnetic locking strip of the deck. He crossed his arms. "Murder. We were fired upon. Check your logs, Subprocessor, or do your eyes malfunction?" "Logs indicate a catastrophic containment failure on the Envoy vessel, followed by lethal kinetic impact from your platform," the hologram replied smoothly, dismissing Hale's claim as if it were the babbling of a child. "Your defense will be heard. Compliance is mandatory. Non-compliance will result in the immediate atomization of your vessel and the subsequent targeting of your origin world." Hale felt the weight of every soul on board and the billions back on Earth. The threat sounded casual, routine, like a parking enforcement officer explaining a tow. "If I leave, what happens to my crew?" Hale demanded. "The vessel remains under quarantine. Life support will be maintained by external fields. You have one standard time unit to board the transport." The connection cut out without a goodbye. Hale drifted back to his chair. He looked at Newton. Terror filled her, yet she held it together. Engineers could manage fear, provided they had a problem to solve. "Keep the air cycling, Sporks," Hale said, unbuckling his flight harness. "If the scrubbers fail, bypass the safeties and run them hot. Burn them out if needed. Just keep breathing." "Where do you go?" Newton asked. "To talk to the landlords," Hale grunted. He looked down at the console next to him. During the fight, a heavy steel bolt about the size of a cucumber and weighing 3 pounds had sheared off the main reactor coupling. Dense, threaded, and coated in gritty reactor grease, it sat as a jagged piece of reality. Hale picked it up. The weight felt reassuring. It felt real. It felt like an object that had a job and did it. It represented the antithesis of the Cathari holographic nonsense. He shoved the bolt into the thigh pocket of his flight suit. "Captain," Stephen said, voice shaky, "you plan to change? Dress blues, medals?" Hal looked down at his flight suit. Oil, blood, and coffee stained the fabric. A tear marked the knee. It smelled of sweat, fear, and ozone. "No," Hal said, zipping the pocket shut. "They want the monster that killed their diplomat? I intend to show them exactly who we are. If I dress up, I play their game. If I go like this, I make them play mine." The automated transport shuttle docking with the Hephaestus stood as a masterpiece of Cathari design. The interior boasted a blinding, seamless white. Curves replaced corners. The lighting seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows. Silent and sterile, the space smelled faintly of lavender and superiority. Hal stepped aboard, magnetic boots clanking loudly, offensively, against the pristine deck. Every step left a faint, oily footprint on the perfect white floor. Clink, clink, clink. He stood in the center of the shuttle as it detached. A soft chime-like voice echoed. "Please assume a position of repose on the inertial dampening cushions." Hal looked at the fields of force acting as chairs. They resembled clouds made of light. He refused to trust anything he couldn't hit with a wrench. "I prefer standing," he grumbled. "Safety regulations recommend the cushions for high-G stabilization." The computer chided gently. "The deck plating provides gravity, but no inertial compensation." "I said I'll stand," Hal interrupted. "Or I'll sit on the floor. Your call. I refuse to float on a magic cloud." He dropped to the floor, crossing his legs on the white surface. He felt the artificial gravity humming beneath the plating. Smooth. Too smooth. It lacked vibration. He took a ration bar out of his pocket, peanut butter and sawdust flavor, the military special, and tore the wrapper open with his teeth. He chewed deliberately, letting crumbs fall on the immaculate white surface where they sat, stark and ugly against the perfection. He looked around the empty shuttle. It was designed to make him feel small, to make him feel dirty. He leaned forward and inspected the wall paneling. No seams, no rivets. "How do you service this thing?" he muttered, running a greasy finger along the wall, leaving a distinct black streak. No access panels? When a relay blows, do you buy a new ship? He tapped the wall with his knuckles. It sounded hollow. Cheap, he whispered. All flash, no substance. He avoided doing it just to be difficult. He did it to make a point. The Cathari valued form over function. They hid their ugly parts. Humans built their ugly parts on the outside so they could fix them. He acted as a containment, and he intended to be the most difficult, stubborn containment they had ever tried to scrub out. The shuttle docked at the Arbiter Citadel. The station was terrifyingly beautiful, a massive spire of white glass and silver orbiting a gas giant. It looked like a cathedral built by mathematicians who had never heard of dirt. It spun slowly, a needle of order against the chaos of the gas giant's storms. The airlock cycled with the musical hum, and Hal stepped out into a hallway stretching for miles. The ceiling was vaulted, vanishing into a haze of light. Waiting for him stood a Cathari officer, taller than the hologram, wearing armor that looked more ceremonial than functional. White ceramic plates etched with gold circuitry. He embodied authority. I am Commander Ravix, the alien said. He looked at Hal, nose wrinkling. The Cathari liked noses like humans, just two elegant slits, but the expression of olfactory offense proved universal. You are filthy. I've had a busy morning, Hal said, wiping his hands on his pants. Captain Orion Hal, UEF Hephaestus. Ravix stepped back, avoiding Hal's extended hand as if it emitted radiation. You are a barbarian. You ought to be processed. Hand over your weapons. I carry no weapons, Hal said, holding his hands up. Ravix pointed a slender hand at Hal. It beeped. Scanner indicates a dense ferrous projectile in your lower garment. Hal reached into his pocket and pulled out the reactor bolt. He held it up. The grease on it caught the perfect light of the station. This? Hal asked. It is a primitive kinetic weapon. Surrender it. Hal's fingers tightened around the threads. He needed this. He needed the weight. It acted as his anchor to reality, the dreamscape of light. It functions as a religious icon, Hal lied smoothly. Ravix blinked, his smooth face rippling with confusion. Explain. It represents the great god of torque, Hal deadpanned, his face utterly serious. To remove it from my person before the ritual of trial is a violation of my spiritual rights. Does the Cathari law prohibit freedom of worship? I was told the hegemony practiced tolerance. Ravix froze. The Cathari were bureaucrats. Bureaucrats feared nothing more than a discrimination lawsuit, even from a barbarian. It would create paperwork, endless paperwork. The law is inclusive, Ravix said slowly, clearly pained by the logic. You may retain your idol, but keep it concealed. It stains the visual harmony of the corridor, and refrain from brandishing it. Sure thing, Chief, Hale said, slipping the bolt back into his pocket. He patted it. 1-0 for the mechanic. The holding cell was a cube of transparent aluminum suspended in the center of a large circular room. Privacy did not exist. Commander Ravix stood outside, tapping on a holographic interface floating in the air. You face charges for the murder of a protected envoy, Ravix recited, voice bored, like a man reading a grocery list. The penalty is erasure. The secondary penalty is the re-education of your species. Your planet will remain under blockade until you learn to behave. I want the discovery packet, Hell said. He sat on the floor of the cell, leaning against the transparent wall, looking incredibly comfortable for a man on death row. Ravix looked up. The what? The evidence, the sensor logs, the flight data. In my culture, the accused holds the right to view the evidence against him. Or does this court function as a sham? I fail to understand your cultural references, but the law grants full transparency, Ravix said haughtily. We have nothing to hide because we do not lie. He swiped his hand and a massive holographic file materialized inside the cell. These are the raw sensor logs from the Arbiter array. They're in base 16 code. A primitive mind would require decades to decipher them. Beep, brrr. Ravix flinched. Hell had pulled a portable diagnostic slate, a chunky, rubberized tablet kept in his flight suit, and jabbed its probe directly into the holographic emitter node on the floor. "Define your actions," Ravix demanded. "That is a non-standard interaction." "I look under the hood," Hell muttered. He pulled a bag of dehydrated potato chips from his other pocket, tore it open with his teeth, and started munching. "I don't read hex code with my eyes, Commander. I refuse to act like a robot. I read voltage variance. I read signal decay." Ravix stared at him, horrified. The sound of the chewing echoed in the pristine acoustic environment like gunshots. Crunch, crunch, crunch. "You contaminate the data field with snack residue," Ravix whispered. Hell ignored him. He watched the waveforms on his slate. He swept his hand through the floating data, isolating timestamps on his screen. He refrained from looking for the legal tags. He disregarded the diplomatic flags. He sought the physics. He examined the energy output of the envoy ship. He examined the thermal gradients. He examined the magnetic density. "You guys rely on automation a lot, correct?" Hell mumbled, mouthful of chips. "Machine sees a tag, machine believes the tag." "Perfection requires no intervention," Ravix replied stiffly. "The arbiter acts without error." "Perfection exists as a myth," Hell said, pointing a chip at the Cathari. "Entropy is the only truth. Things break, always, and usually right when you need them not to." Hours passed. Hell had finished the chips and now turned the steel bolt over and over in his left hand, while his right hand manipulated the diagnostic slate. The rhythmic clink-clink of the bolt against his wedding ring drove Ravix insane. But Hell found it. It wasn't a glitch. The Arbiter hadn't made a mistake. The Cathari sensors used a magnetic fluid suspension system, basically a giant pool of ferrofluid in subspace detecting ripples in gravity and electromagnetism. It claimed to be flawless. But Hell knew magnets. He knew spinning up a high-yield magnetic coil too fast created a backwash, a shudder in the local field. There, in the log, timestamp 0.4 seconds before the explosion. The sensor data didn't show a weapon firing. It showed a blink, a split second where the magnetic fluid suspension destabilized and reset. The computer had flagged it as diplomatic privacy procedure engaged and auto-corrected the data to smooth it out. It hadn't failed to see it. The programming instructed it to act blind. "Gotcha," Hell whispered, a grin spreading across his tired face. "You failed to blink. You wore a blindfold." "Hey, space cop," Hell called out, banging on the glass with the butt of his slate. Ravix sighed, the sound of a man whose patience had evaporated hours ago. He walked over to the cell wall. "I am a commander of the hegemony, not a space cop. Look at this." Hell pointed at the jagged line of his tablet screen, contrasting it with the smooth line on the hologram. "Your sensors. They run on magnetic fluid, correct? Ferrosuspension." Ravix nodded, arrogance returning. "The finest detection medium in the galaxy. Flawless. It detects the gravity of a grain of sand at 10 kilometers. "Nothing disturbs that fluid," Hell said, tapping the air where the jagged line hung. "Except a massive localized magnetic coil spooling up in close proximity, like, say, 100 terawatts of magnetic pressure." "Absurd," Ravix scoffed. "The envoy vessel acted as a transport. It has no heavy magnetic coils. It uses grav drives. Grav drives do not create magnetic backwash." "Then why did your sensor fluid ripple like water in a gale?" Hell asked, voice dropping low and tense. "That blink? That exceeds a glitch. That is induction. Something on that ship pulled enough juice to brown out your own sensors for half a second. That signifies a power draw, Ravix. A big one." Ravix looked at the data. He frowned. He tilted his head. "The Arbiter filtered it," Ravix noted, reading the code. "It flagged it as a diplomatic privacy. We lack permission to scan the internal workings of a diplomat ship." "Exactly," Hell said. "The machine followed instructions. It put on a blindfold because the tag said diplomat, but physics ignores tags. If that ship acted only as a transport, why did it have a power draw big enough to require a privacy filter? What were they hiding that needs that much juice?" Ravix didn't answer. He looked disturbed. He looked like a man who just found a crack in the foundation of his house. The door to the detention block slid open with a hiss that sounded expensive. Ravix snapped to attention, armor clinking.
Hi, Justicar Vilas,
Ravix said, bowing low. Vilos glided into the room. Older than Ravix, his violet skin faded to a pale, majestic gray. He wore robes of gold and white trailing behind him like regal smoke. He refrained from walking. He floated a few inches off the ground on a personal gravity disk. "Leave us, Commander," Vilos said. His voice sounded like silk wrapped around a razor blade. Ravix hesitated, glancing at the data Hell had highlighted, then back at Vilos. He bowed and left, but the hesitation remained visible. Vilos floated up to the glass. He looked at Hell with a mixture of pity and indifference, like a man looking at a form he had yet to sign. "Captain Hale, I trust the accommodations suffice. I understand you prefer dirt floors, but we simply couldn't accommodate." "I've slept in worse," Hell said, standing up and stretching. He kept the bolt in his hand, tossing it gently. Thud, thud. "You are the guy trying to erase my planet. You look remarkably calm about genocide." "Genocide is such an emotional word," Vilos corrected, folding his hands inside his sleeves. "It is merely administrative sanitation. Your species is messy. You break things. It is simply a matter of filing the correct closure forms to ensure the sector remains tidy." "Mercy. You locked my ship in a box and threatened to nuke Earth. That's a funny definition of sanitation." "An unfortunate necessity." Vilos wavered a hand, dismissing the threat as it were a minor paperwork error. "But let us be practical. The trial is a formality. The outcome is predetermined. However, I can offer you a plea deal. Admit that your firing was a result of primitive panic. Admit incompetence. Plead to involuntary manslaughter due to technical inferiority. Say you were scared. Say your primitive brain malfunctioned." Hell raised an eyebrow. "And if I do?" "Earth will be fined. Your military will be dismantled for its own safety. But your species will survive. You will be returned home, disgraced, but alive." "And the envoy?" Hell asked. "The one who fired first?" "The envoy died in a tragic malfunction," Vilos said, voice hard. "There is no need to tarnish the memory of the dead with lies about weapons that did not exist. It serves no purpose." Hell stopped tossing the bolt. He gripped it hard. The metal bit into his palm. He knows, Hell thought. He knows about the magnetic coil. He knows the envoy was armed. "You want me to lie," Hell said. "You want me to take the fall so you avoid explaining why a diplomat was packing heat." "I want you to facilitate the smooth progression of justice." Vilos smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. "Do not confuse the truth with the law, Captain. They are often strangers." Hell chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound entirely out of place in the sterile room. "You assume stupidity," Hell said, walking up to the glass until he was nose to nose with the floating alien. "You see grease on my suit, the dirt under my fingernails, and you think there's a brute, a laborer, a monkey with a hammer. Are you not?" Vilos sneered. "You hit things with metal slugs. You are a mechanic." "Damn right I am," Hell said. He held up the bolt. And let me tell you something about mechanics, Your Honor. We understand plumbing. High law acts like plumbing. It consists of pipes and pressure. When a blockage occurs, filth backs up. Now look at the blockage right now." Vilos stiffened. "Watch your tongue, savage. Your metaphors are vulgar." "You failed to delete the logs of that magnetic spike," Hell continued, voice rising. "You couldn't. The Arbiter records everything. You cannot delete history. So you filtered them. You put a diplomatic privacy cap on the line. You put a lid on the septic tank. But the pressure is building, Vilos. And when I pull the flush, you will be covered in whatever you try to hide." Vilas's face lost its composure for a fraction of a second. A twitch of the eye, a tightening of the jaw. "You cannot access filtered logs," Vilas hissed. "You are a primitive. You will accept the plea, or I will authorize the sterilization of your planet myself. Not out of malice, you understand, but simply because I tire of the noise you make." Vilas turned and floated away, robes swirling. "See you in court," Hell shouted after him. "Wear a raincoat." Left alone, Hell paced the cell. He had bluffed. He knew Vilas had filtered the logs, but he lacked the skill to unfilter them. He worked as a mechanic, not a hacker. He returned to the datapad. He pulled up the Cathari legal codex. Dense, convoluted, and boring, it contained millions of pages of precedents and subclauses. Luckily, Hell had read technical manuals for sewage recycling units. He was immune to boredom. He could find a needle in a haystack if the needle was a slightly different shade of gray. He searched for National Security Procedures. Clause 89.4, security seals and privacy filters may be applied to data regarding the movement, armament, or operations of sovereign state agents. Sovereign state agents, Hell muttered, rubbing his chin. Diplomats, military, spies. He searched for exceptions. Exceptions always exist. Systems have backdoors, pressure valves. Clause 90.1. Entities designated as non-state actors are not afforded state protection. He searched for non-state actors. Definitions: mercenaries, unsanctioned traders, pirates. Hell stopped. He zoomed in on piracy. Definition of piracy: the possession or use of prohibited Class A weaponry by a vessel not designated as a warship. Hell grinned. It was a wolfish grin, showing too many teeth. If the envoy had a Class A weapon, Hell reasoned aloud, then by law he wasn't a diplomat. He was a pirate. And pirates don't get privacy filters. Pirates don't get to hide behind the law. He didn't need to prove the envoy fired. He didn't need to prove intent. He just needed to prove the envoy had the gun. The tribunal was a nightmare of verticality. It functioned as a massive amphitheater, but instead of seats, thousands of floating platforms drifted in a slow, mesmerizing orbit around a central spire. The scale was dizzying. The audience, a menagerie of the galaxy, watched from the hovering pods. Species Hell had never seen. Crabs in mech suits, clouds of sentient gas pulsing with colors. Geometric silicon beams that chimed when they moved. Trained millions of eyes, sensors, and feelers on him. Hell stood on the central platform. A flat disk of white stone, it hung suspended over a drop plunging down for miles into the gas giant's clouds below. He felt very small, very dirty, and very alone. The wind whipped his hair. He pulled a small laser tape measure from his belt, another tool from his flight suit, and clicked it on. A red dot appeared on the golden dais hovering above him. He measured the distance, 45.2 meters. He clicked it off, then on again. 45.2 meters. "Seize that!" A voice boomed from the dais. Above him, on a golden dais looking down on everything like Olympus, sat Vilas and two other high Justicars. They looked like gods passing judgment on an insect. And above them all, the Arbiter. The Arbiter wasn't a person. It was a swirling mass of geometric light, a storm of code and judgment hanging in the air like a localized aurora borealis. It hummed with a sound that rattled Hell's teeth and vibrated the bolt in his pocket.
"The tribunal is in session."
The Arbiter's voice boomed. It lacked the psychic quality of the earlier shout, but was loud enough to vibrate Hell's chest cavity.
"Case genocide over. Murder of envoy."
Vilas rose. He looked magnificent, a beacon of civilization against the barbarian darkness. "Honored, Arbiter," Vilas began, his voice amplified to fill the vast space, smooth and persuasive. "The facts are simple. A human vessel, Hephaestus, encountered our envoy. The envoy suffered a critical reactor malfunction. The humans, savage and bloodthirsty, seized the moment of weakness and fired kinetic rounds, obliterating the vessel. This was not war.
This was slaughter. This was a predator attacking a wounded animal.
A massive holographic screen appeared in the air, miles wide. It played the video. It was edited. It started exactly 1 second after the Cathari ship had fired the plasma lens. It showed the Hephaestus firing the slugs. It showed the Cathari ship exploding. Without the context of the first shot, it looked like cold-blooded execution. The audience murmured. The sound resembled a rising tide of disapproval, a low buzz of hatred.
We demand justice,
Vilos thundered, pointing a long finger at Hale.
We demand the erasure of the human military capability to prevent further atrocities. They are not ready for the stars.
Primary responded sealed.
The Arbiter intoned.
Speak.
Hale stepped forward. He refused to bow. He refused to float. He stood with his feet apart, bracing himself as if the floor might tilt. He looked like he was about to start a bar fight. I acknowledge the discharge of weapons, Hale said. His voice sounded scratchy compared to Vilas' smooth tones, unpolished and raw. I fired those slugs. Given the same circumstances, I'd do it again. The crowd gasped. Vilos looked smug, crossing his arms. The barbarian was hanging himself. But I dispute the classification of the target, Hale continued, pointing a grease-stained finger at the swirling AI.
Objection,
Vilos shouted.
The target is identified as Envoy Unit 6, Diplomatic Registry. The identification is absolute.
The Arbiter ignored the first shot fired at me, Hale shouted over him, looking straight at the light storm. Why? Because the target was tagged diplomatic. A diplomat cannot fire. Therefore, the Arbiter ruled the energy spike a malfunction. I'm here to correct the Arbiter's database.
Correction is not required.
The Arbiter rumbled.
Data is absolute.
Data's only as good as the sensor input, Hale countered. And your sensors blinked. I know you saw it. You just chose to ignore it. I demand the deep layer sensor logs for the timestamp of the incident, Hale said, voice echoing. Specifically, the magnetic suspension telemetry. Show me the raw feed. Take the blindfold off. Vilos smiled. It was the smile of a man springing a trap he had set days ago. Request denied, Vilos said smoothly, bowing to the Arbiter. Those logs are sealed under National Security Procedure Omega. They contain sensitive movements of the High Fleet in that sector. They cannot be viewed by a primitive, nor can they be entered into open court. It would compromise the hegemony. Hale looked at the other judges. They nodded in agreement. Rules were rules.
The seal is valid.
The Arbiter ruled.
Access denied.
Vilos leaned forward, looking down at Hale. You lack any other defense, human. Submit. Save your dignity. Sign the form. Hale reached into his pocket. For a second, Ravix, watching from a side platform, gripping the railing, thought he was going for the bolt. Instead, Hale pulled out his context recorder. It was his battered, brick-like datapad wrapped in rubber. I can't show you the logs, Hale said, walking to the edge of his platform. But I can show you physics. Math ignores security clearance. Math ignores your politics. He slammed the datapad onto the projector node on the floor. He had jury-rigged the connection with spare wire and silver bonding strip. Simulation magnetic displacement, Hale commanded. A hologram sprang up. It liked the sleek, pretty quality of the Cathari display. It was a wireframe engineering simulation, ugly red and jagged green lines. It looked low-res and gritty. It filled the courtroom. A massive, pulsating red sphere of magnetic distortion appeared in the center of the room, overlaying the space where the envoy ship had been. This, Hale shouted, walking through the hologram, the red light washing over his dirty face. This represents the magnetic footprint required to cause a 0.4-second blink in your fluid sensors. Look at the shape. It's toroidal. The judges leaned back, intimidated by the aggressive red light. This is not an engine malfunction, Hale yelled, voice raw with intensity. Engines fail to create toroidal magnetic fields of this magnitude. It's like finding a nuclear isotope in a bakery.
You know what makes this signature? A proto-core launcher charging a plasma bolt. That is a weapons signature.
Hell turned to Vilos. The Justicar looked pale. The smile was gone.
Possession of a proto-care launcher is a Class 1 felony,
Hell said, voice echoing like a verdict.
It is an act of piracy. By definition, a pirate cannot hold diplomatic status.
Hell reached into his pocket and pulled out the steel bolt. He gripped it like a talisman, feeling the threads bite into his skin.
If he's not a diplomat,
Hell said, pointing the bolt at the Arbiter like an accusing finger,
he has no national security rights. He has no privacy rights.
He took a deep breath. This was it. The Hail Mary, the wrench in the gears.
Arbiter, if the target was a pirate, is the security seal valid?
The swirling light of the Arbiter stopped moving. It froze. The hum deepened. The machine was thinking. It was processing the logic chain. It was running the calculation against the filter Vilos had installed. If target equals pirate, then status equals non-state actor. If status equals non-state actor, then rights equals null.
Negative.
The Arbiter's voice shook the spire.
Piracy, self-protection.
Vilos panicked. He stood up, knocking over his chair.
Objection! He is speculating. There is no proof of the weapon. The simulation is a primitive fabrication. He lies to confuse the senses.
Hell spun around. He spotted Ravix on the side platform. The Cathari commander stared at the red hologram.
Commander Ravix,
Hell shouted.
You saw the raw data. You saw the blink. Tell him.
Ravix froze. Vilos glared at him, eyes burning with a threat. Silence, or you end. Silence, or your family ends.
Commander Ravix, are you a pirate?
Hell asked, voice cutting through the noise.
Or do you serve the law? Does the Cathari honor mean anything, or is it just paint?
Ravix looked at Vilos. He saw the corruption, the arrogance, the sleek veneer covering the rot. He saw the lie. Then he looked at Hale. The human was dirty, rude, and holding a piece of garbage like a weapon. But the human told the truth. The Cathari prided themselves on smoothness, but Hell had shown Ravix that sometimes truth feels rough. Sometimes truth possesses jagged edges. Ravix stepped forward. He tapped his chest armor, activating his communicator.
I serve the law,
Ravix said clearly. His voice rang out.
I examined the raw data with the respondent. I witnessed the magnetic displacement. It matches the signature of a protocol launcher.
The courtroom erupted. Aliens shouted, buzzed, and clicked. The Arbiter refrained from waiting for the crowd to settle. It disregarded the crowd entirely.
Corroboration accepted.
The machine roared.
Security invalidated. Unlocking undeclared logs.
Above Vilos, the massive screen flickered. The edited tag vanished. The national security seal dissolved. The logical filter Vilos had installed to blind the AI was stripped away. The blink was revealed. The sensor data unspooled. The image cleared, enhanced by Arbiter's full processing power. There it was. The Cathari envoy ship. The panel slid back. The ugly glowing muzzle of an illegal plasma weapon extended. The red coils glowed with the energy that Hell's simulation had predicted. The weapon fired. The Hephaestus fired back. The truth stood naked for the galaxy to see. It was undeniable. The Arbiter's light turned from white to a deep, angry crimson, the color of blood, the color of judgment.
Target reclassed. Pirate, aggressive conversant. Cathari on vessel 6.
The machine turned its attention to the golden dais. The eye of the storm focused on Vilos.
Cover-up attempt detected. Complicity in piracy detected. False witness detected.
Hell watched as the message flashed in his mind again.
Cease attacks. All witness all truths of wrath.
He realized what it meant. The Cathari hadn't built the true wrath to fight enemies. They built it to fight themselves. They built a machine so logical that it would eat its own creators if they lied. They built a guillotine and stuck their own necks in it.
True wrath. Procedures initiated.
The Arbiter stated. Space around Earth warped. The Onyx platforms vanished. Space around the Tribunal Spire warped. Massive Onyx warning platforms appeared inside the courtroom's orbital perimeter. Red targeting lasers, thousands of them, punched through the open air of the amphitheater. They ignored Hell. They locked onto Vilos. Chaos ensued. Automated drones, sleek and silver, descended from the ceiling like a swarm of angry wasps. They swarmed Vilos' dais. Vilos screamed, dignity forgotten. He scrambled back, tripping over his robes.
I am a High Justicar! You cannot touch me! There are forms! There are procedures!
You are a criminal, the Arbiter replied. Law is absolute.
The drones clamped onto Vilos and his staff. They were dragged from their podiums, kicking and screaming. The wrath wasn't a bombardment. It was the ruthless, blind application of the law Vilos thought he controlled. It was a purge. Hell stood in the center of the whirlwind. The wind from the drones whipped his hair. He reached into his pocket, found a stray crumb of ration bar, and popped it into his mouth. He looked up at the terrifying machine god. "Are we done here?" he asked. The red light faded. The Arbiter returned to its geometric white swirl. The tension snapped.
Defendant cleared,
the Arbiter said.
Status sovereign automatic escrow release initiate pursuant to Statute 44. False imprisonment.
Hell turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for him. They looked at him with fear and awe. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was the man who had weaponized their own god against them. He was the primitive who had taught the masters a lesson in logic.
Captain Hale!
Ravix ran up to him near the shuttle bay. The authority officer looked shaken. His armor was askew.
You almost destroyed the Citadel,
Ravix said, breathless.
If the Arbiter had decided Vilos was legitimate, if it had decided the seal held...
But he wasn't, Hell shrugged. Never bet on a machine to lie for you, Ravix. Machines are honest. That's why I like them. They don't have egos. They don't need to save face. Hell stopped. He pulled the heavy steel bolt from his pocket. He weighed it in his hand one last time. It had served its purpose. It had been his anchor. It had been his gavel. He tossed it to Ravix. Ravix caught it, surprised by the weight. He looked at the greasy object like it was a holy relic. "Keep it," Hell said. "Put it on your desk. Reminds you that if you build a machine to kill liars, you better stop lying." Ravix looked at the bolt, then up at Hell. He bowed. Not a shallow bow of protocol, but a deep bow of respect. I will." Hell walked onto the bridge of the Hephaestus. The red emergency lights were gone. The main lights were on. The hum of the reactor was a beautiful, steady vibration in the floor. It was the song of life.
Captain on deck!
Stephen shouted, jumping out of his chair. Bandages covered him, but he smiled. Hell waved him down. He slumped into his command chair. It groaned under his weight, and he patted the hull tape affectionately. "Status, Sparks?" Hell asked, closing his eyes for a second. Newton spun around, grinning so wide it looked painful. Lockdown lifted. The platforms are gone. And get this. The Arbiter just triggered an automatic escrow release. Reparations for illegal detainment. It signifies a massive credit dump, Captain. We can afford to fix the hull. Hell, we can afford to buy a new ship. "Let's stick to this one," Hell said, rubbing his eyes. "I just got the seat comfortable." "What a cut down there, Cap," Newton asked, leaning back. "We lost the feed when the lasers showed up. Did you go a few good men on them?" "I just explained the plumbing to them," Hell said. "Turns out they had a leak. A big one. And nobody likes a clogged pipe." He leaned forward. "Helm, set a course for Earth. Let's go home. I need a shower and a real coffee." Before they jumped, Hell opened a fleet-wide channel. The signal was boosted by the Arbiter array, blasting it across the entire sector. He cleared his throat. "This is Captain Orion Hell of the United Earth Forces. We respect the law. We respect the peace. But do not mistake our patience for weakness." He looked at the view screen, at the stars that were finally clear again. "You call it true wrath. We just call it percussive maintenance. And we're fixing the galaxy, one dent at a time. Earth out." The galaxy listened, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy was afraid of the naked ape with the wrench.